Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Broken Banquet, a podcast about missions. We are your hosts, Will Bailey and Dr. Ashley Goad, and we are so glad that you have joined us for another conversation about the church and missions, about what healthy mission relationships can look like, and as we hear from others who have dedicated their lives in one way or another to mission work. We're so glad you're here, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Hey, Ashley.
Good morning, Will.
How are you?
I'm really good. We're back from Israel.
I know it feels like a long time since we've done this. Not to our listeners because they've been listening every week, but it's been like a couple of months since the last time we actually recorded something.
It does feel like that. We recorded the Holy Land episode right before we left, but it's been like 3 weeks.
It feels like longer. So, Ashley, today's interview is with Reverend Patrick Friday, who is the pastor at, I think I said the name of his church wrong when I introduced him in the actual interview. It's the church at Cahaba Bend, which is a United Methodist church, but I think I may have called it like First Methodist Cahaba Bend or something like that. It's the church at Cahaba Bend. And I've known Patrick for a few years now, and it was just really cool because of his experiences in the mission. He's done it all. He's been a missionary in the field. He's been a pastor of a local church. He's been involved in leadership at a sending agency that sends and prepares missionaries, for the field. So, we touched on a whole lot of stuff. But one of the coolest things we touched on is a sort of personal connection that you and your church have to Patrick.
Well, it was so cool to meet somebody that I've never met before, but we knew the same people and we had been to the same places. And so we were naturally connected because of this wonderful global mission body that we have fallen into relationship with. So it was great to talk with him about Yekaterinburg and how he was in the beginning, how he was on all of these trips in the beginning to help that partnership get started. And then how 20 years later, here I am bringing up the rear and continuing that relationship into the future. So it was great to make that connection. I love making connections.
So there were people from the Louisiana conference who, together with people from the Alabama conference, or which I'm not sure if that's a divided conference or not, but anyway, the conference that Patrick was from, who together started developing this relationship in Russia.
Correct.
Decades
Yeah.
ago.
When the Iron Curtain fell, Dwight Ramsey and several others were among the first over to find these Methodists. They got off at the wrong train stop and ended up meeting Methodists, and that's how it all began.
That's awesome. Well, and how cool is that? The sort of the spider web of connections for you guys. I'm kind of glad that we realized it while we were recording, and that you guys didn't already know that ahead of time. So
It was authentic surprise and excitement.
very cool. Well, let's let people hear from Patrick. What do you think?
Sounds great. Here's Patrick.
Ashley, I want you to meet my friend Patrick Friday, who is currently the pastor at Cahaba Bend United Methodist Church outside of Birmingham, Alabama. And is it Helena or Helena? I never say it right. Which one is it, Patrick?
Helena.
Helena. See, even when I think I'm getting
Mhm.
two possible options, one of them isn't right. Helena.
Mobile. Yeah.
Yeah.
Helena, yeah.
If you guys in Alabama could just name your cities in ways that would be easier for everybody else to say them, that would be a big help.
That'd
And
be great.
Patrick, this is my friend Ashley. Ashley Goad is the missions pastor at First Methodist Church in Shreveport, Louisiana. And Ashley and I have known each other for a very long time and have had lots of really, what we think, good conversations about missions. And so we just decided maybe we could share those conversations with other people and include people who have lots of experience in missions as well. So we started the Broken Banquet last year and have been fortunate to be able to reach out to a lot of the contacts that both of us have all over the world and have these conversations together. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation, particularly because we've talked to people already who have sort of experience maybe in one particular area. You have experience like in all the areas. You've been a local church pastor, you've been a missionary, you've worked for a sort of a sending agency. I mean, you've ticked all the boxes. So
Mhm.
we're just going to sit back and let you talk for the next hour. If you don't, and enlighten us and our listeners. We've named this podcast "The Broken Banquet" because we believe that there is a heavenly banquet that we have all been invited to that is perfect and is holy,
Amen.
but it has been corrupted by us and the world, and it is broken right now.
Mhm.
And what are the things that hopefully we can do through healthy mission relationships that then extend to all areas of ministry that can help heal what is broken about that table. And so we've talked a lot about the relationships between local churches and the missionaries that they're connected to. We've talked a lot about the relationships between those missionaries and the communities where they're serving and what it means for them to sort of be a bridge between the local church and those communities,
Right.
and lots of other stuff. So we're just excited to pick your brain a little bit today and let you share your perspective based on your experiences in the field and as a pastor and all of that kind of stuff. So welcome to the Broken Banquet.
Oh, thank you. This is a real treat. And I just want to say, even though I haven't had a chance to take a deep dive into the podcast you've made so far, I'm so grateful that you're lifting up this conversation. You've already touched on key issues in terms of how groups and partners relate to missionaries and how missionaries relate to their context, and bringing all that together, which on the surface it seems like it should just all fall into place, but sometimes there's miscommunication, maybe an abundance of miscommunication, and it's not because anybody intends for it to be so. It's with the best of intentions, and yet, uh, if you look at mission in terms of a short term experience, there's not a lot of time to get up to
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
speed. If you're just getting off the plane, here I am, and you haven't had conversations, you haven't listened into podcasts like this, and just really started to um, help frame things before you get there. And so
Mhm.
I'm very grateful to be a part of this today.
Thank you.
Well, Patrick, I am too because I haven't met you at all. This is our first interaction to actually say hello. So, hello.
Hello.
And I wish I had known that we were going to be interviewing you when I was in Birmingham because I drove by your church like 5 times and I would have stopped in just to say hello.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
S-
next time.
So,
Sounds
next
like
time,
you do come
next time,
by frequently, so do come by.
I will.
Love to see you in person.
Will
That'd be
do.
great.
Will do. I would love to know just who you are, a little bit back about your background. Just tell us the good stuff in the past. Who are you, Patrick?
Who am I? Well, um, God keeps working on me. That's my hope and prayer, and that's what I feel every day. And in terms of mission, it's always been part of my journey. Even when think back on my own family, and my father was a pastor, and so um,
Mhm,
he went to Cuba and to Panama. These were short-term kind of evangelism events.
mhm,
And as I look back on it, I just remember him telling me little bits and pieces about that. So I knew that, that was a good thing to go out, get beyond your world, get beyond your bubble, get beyond your comfort zone. And then also back to my family, there were always people from different cultures in our journey. And so that was just comfortable. And then as God started working on me at church Camp Samatonga here in North Alabama, missionaries would come in and say, you are the only hands and feet of
mhm,
Christ. You're the
mhm,
ones. And you need to go. Are you ready? So even when I was in junior high, going to those camps, I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready. God's calling me. I feel it. But what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? How does that work? Where do you start? Even though when you feel the Spirit moving, where do you start? And so we're very fortunate here, again, in sort of my formation spiritually, and even in terms of my calling and career, profession, those type things. All of it kind of merged together because as I'm going through high school and college, I'm still connected, of course, to our church, United Methodist Church, and I went to United Methodist College, Birmingham-Southern College. Anyway, all those things were linked in terms of opportunities to serve and to go to different countries. So um, I was really excited that when I was in high school, we have kind of a Mother Teresa figure here in North Alabama named Nina Reeves. She's been the youth leader for 50 years. She's now in her 90s. She's amazing. In fact, she related to some people in Louisiana. I want to
Oh.
say David Stone was his name. Maybe in
Oh, no kidding.
Shreveport. Yeah,
He was at our church as a youth
I
pastor. His
was. I
daughter,
was. There we go.
his daughter still comes here. Yeah, she was just here on Sunday, and I
Oh,
think I
that's
met David. He came with her on Christmas Eve, and I met him for the first time.
beautiful. Well, there you go. In the Methodist world, it is a small world, right? So here we
Connection.
are. Um, so David Stone was working in the Soviet Union and had taken a youth group over there. I'm going to say 87, maybe 86. Am I right?
Was he with Dwight Ramsey?
Yes, Dwight Ramsey. Yes, all that was coming together. There you
Oh
go.
my goodness, Patrick. We have
Yeah.
a story for you. Keep going.
Okay, let me just
Well,
stop you guys. I've got
yeah.
some errands that I need to go run, so you two can just you keep up, figure out all the people, all the friends you have in common. I'm sure it's going to be a great episode, and I look forward to hearing it.
Well, that's it. I mean,
Well,
go ahead.
Will, this is going to end up with Olga and Eager. So hold on just a
Oh my
second. Keep going,
gosh.
Yeah,
Patrick.
yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I can see that. So there you go. You've got youth ministry, exposing youth to the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your church, my experience, coming together, our conferences, etc. And so I just remember that I went to the Soviet Union with the youth group there in North Alabama.
You were on
Mhm.
that trip with Ross Barrett and Corbin Barnes, and they're two members of our
Mm,
church, and they would have been youth.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, interesting. It
Okay.
it the overlap. Thank you for lifting that up. The overlap was there between our conferences and youth
Mm-hmm.
programs. Nina Reeves knew David Stone, and vice versa,
Oh my
and that led
goodness.
us to having a peace camp here, bringing in young people from all over Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, uh, and I love that. That's what the connection's all about. Oh my goodness, I just love that. So for
Okay.
me, it
Well,
was so natural. Yes.
can I want to tell you the connection that has come now to me. So that was from 87. When
Hmm.
I got here in when I got to Shreveport in 2013,
Hmm.
one of the members of my church said, "I need you to meet a guy named James Gillespie." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he goes to Broadmoor United Methodist, which is in my
Hmm.
neighborhood.
Hmm.
And the person at my church said, "You need to meet James because he goes to Russia every year, and our church has not had a good presence with our church in Ekaterinburg, Russia,
Hmm. Hmm.
for a
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
long time, and
Right.
it's the David Stone years." And I was
Oh,
like,
yep.
"Oh,
Wow. Yeah.
okay, great."
Yeah.
So I took that trip, and I've gone now. I think I've gone back about 10 to 12 times,
Wow.
and so we consider it our sister church. And Olga and Eager, who Will has met from that church,
Hmm.
are the missionaries that my church is in active partnership with.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
so
Oh, I love
Will
it.
will see them in Israel in just a couple of weeks when we're all reunited together.
Oh, praise the
It's a
Lord.
small world after all.
This kind of dates us too. That's a
Ah,
while
don't
back.
don't talk
Okay,
about that.
but But I remember, I'm going to zoom in on a moment in time that goes with me.
Awesome.
I'm in Moscow, 91. Snow, way up here somewhere over my head, and um, and we're at a Stankino. That's the big TV station for Russia at the time. It was like they had
Mhm.
2 or 3 stations for the whole population. Hundreds of millions of people. So, and we're at a Stankino. It's a huge complex, and we're going to have, I believe it was Easter service or Palm Sunday. I believe it was Easter service. Anyway, with your church, I believe. Um, Anyway, they had the satellite. This was back in the satellite trucks and all that stuff. It was very elaborate to pull this off. So they had this enormous antenna. It went way, you could see it from all over the city.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, well, here we are in a country that officially was atheist. Obviously, we know there were many, many believers in the Orthodox Church, but
Mhm.
officially atheist. It has just recently collapsed. And our church has this opportunity to use the TV studio, um, and collaborate. I think you all on the ground, whatever team you had going on, was amazing. This live service, and there we were, and you could. I wasn't. I didn't. I wasn't part of organizing this at all. I was just there. I was just in awe of the moment.
Yeah.
And Lydia Stomina was up there leading, and
Yes.
and Bishop Meaner, I believe, was there, and those type things. And frankly, I was visiting Moscow. I was doing a lot of work in Eastern Europe and in the Baltics, as in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and so I was just blown away by that connection. The world got really small as
Mhm.
we had this live interaction. And so whenever in my journey, and I'll touch a little bit more on it as we go along, I've always thought back on that. Well, if that's possible, if God can do that, which was impossible, God can do that for all of our partnerships. We can find a way to connect. And so much later on, 10, 20 years later on, I'm at the General Board of Global Ministries, and I found that I became sort of a lead advocate on, look, let's use the internet. Let's use, it was called Uvu at the time, this kind of chat thing where we can see each other and do, communion together. Let's have communion with our brothers and
Oh,
sisters live,
yeah.
and that kind of thing. And so technology was getting cheaper, and it didn't cost, whatever. And it was available in even some remote places. So, I was always enthralled by that possibility that that technology could help us to close the gap and to start having conversations before we actually saw each other uh, in person, if you will, or in the flesh. It was just
Mhm.
so. I want to thank you, your church, the witness of your church, how it impacted me as a youth, and then later on in my journey, because you all stepped out in faith in such a bold, brash way, and it touched the world. Good
Wow.
stuff. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I want to just take a pause and go look at a photo that's sitting outside my office that
Hmm.
the whole team from that 87 year signed. And I want to go see if your name is on it.
All right, now let me pause there, because I'm going to say I went to the Soviet Union in 1990, so it's
Okay.
not going to be there.
Okay.
But
Okay.
the reason I went with my conference, North
Right.
Alabama, and so forth, was based on what you all had done a few years earlier.
Right on. Okay. I
And
gotcha.
then the merging of the two really came together with Peace
Okay.
Camp, and again, back to David Stone and Nina Reeves. They were just these amazing youth leaders, in our country, and
Mm-hmm.
they were way up there at the top level, engaging and collaborating, and we all benefited. So,
Wow.
um, but anyway, as that was going on, um, I was coming out of college, and I felt God calling me to the mission field, And I wasn't being a pastor and those type things being brought up as a preacher's kid. I wasn't ready for that. I hadn't heard God's clear, small voice saying that, whispering in my ear. The mission, yes, but the pastor side of it, not as much. And so I had to live into that. And then I ended up um, going over to Estonia, where the persecuted Christians were, as was the case in the Soviet Union. And in that case, in Estonia, they had a Methodist uh, foundation. They were Methodist, and um, they'd been around. They were kind of this remnant of the Methodist Church, and so there I was. We had in 1990, our youth group had gone through there. I'd made some connections. So after college, I went back, and it was still the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was about to collapse. So I
Mm-hmm.
caught the tail end of the Soviet Union, and then it collapsed, and a lot of things unfolded, and that's going to lead into a particular story I think that you're thinking of.
That's why I have my hand raised, because when I've had the opportunity to share my story in a lot of different places and with a lot of different groups of people, and
Hmm.
it's kind of a weird thing when people sort of make a big deal about like your life. And I enjoy telling that story. I enjoy talking to youth about the process I went through, sort of spiritually, that started when I was a youth and all that. And I'm happy to tell that story. And I've sort of, because of the feedback I've gotten, just accepted the fact that, okay, I mean, it's kind of an interesting story, sort of some adventures along the way and that sort of thing. And then I heard your story, and it just completely knocked me down off of my ivory tower, throne, ladder, whichever, however you want to visualize it. But I thought, man, I'm just not even in the same ballpark. So I'm really excited that Ashley and anybody else who listens are going to hear, because it's just one of the most crazy, amazing stories of just being there. Like, all these things were
Mm, mm,
happening and you were
mm,
just, you were there because you were there. One of the things I love that Ashley says often is, we're human beings, not human doings. It's not always about what
mm-hmm,
we're doing, and we want to go do stuff, but the most important thing sometimes is just the being. And just by
mm-hmm,
being there, you wind up being in the midst of some really incredible events.
mm, mm.
So now you can tell that story.
I'm so ready.
Wow. Well, uh, I'll do my best. You know, it was as you said, uh, being present uh, really led to some amazing things, and being all in, and then it sort of falls into kind of a Gump category, right? Of just things starting to happen, and and you just hold on, right?
Yeah.
So I was in Estonia, and um, the vice mayor of Tallinn, the capital city, got to know him, and he was doing some different things with Special Olympics and things like that. They were sort of just starting Special Olympics, really, and he'd been involved, and I knew some people involved, and so um, we got to know each other, and he was prone to sending me to do things for the city of Tallinn. You know, if something, because
Mm.
it was real early in the collapse of the Soviet Union, and so people are showing up saying they want to help from different countries, and he would ask me to go out and kind of meet with them and talk with them, just find out who they were. And basically, I was kind of screening to see, and just report back to him. So, who this group was and what their intentions were, if they were had good intentions or not, or whatever. Anyway, just try to help them with
Mhm.
that. So I wasn't even thinking that when I went to his office one day, and I'm in my early 20s, and he goes, he threw this envelope across the table, and I opened it, and it was this letter, this elaborate letter from the Vatican, you know, come to the Vatican and Talon, we want you to connect. This will be our Estonian representative or whatever. And I'm reading it, and I said, okay, so you're going to be out of town. So what you want me to do? Basically. And he goes, no, you're going to go. And I said, well, I don't know about that. And he said, yes, no, we'll find a way. God will find a way. You're a believer. He said, I want to be a believer, but you are. So I know you believe that this can happen. And so he was preaching back to me.
As you do.
And I said, okay, I don't know how it's going to happen, but here we go. So one thing led to another. God opened doors, and I'm in Rome at the Vatican. And I walk in, and they have this elaborate name tag that says, Father Friday, Estonia, and all this. I'm not a pastor. So I'm looking at this, and it's very ornate. And there's a nun there, Italian nun, and she's presenting them to everybody walking in, the delegates. And so I'm trying to tell her can you change it? Can you just put Patrick Friday? Can you put America? I'm not because it looked like I was Estonian and all that. I mean, I was anyway. So it was, and she was not happy. These were very ornate, elaborate things, and she was giving it back to me with her hand. So I said, eventually, she was really getting upset, and I said, okay, so it's okay. I'll wear it. So I put it on, and I'm walking in, and people are coming up to me, oh, Father, would you bless me and things like that. I'm like, no, I'm not a pastor, and there's always from Estonia. I said, well, I'm from Alabama, and it just wasn't working, and I knew that my job was to be there and represent Estonia. So anyway, we go through the motions, and then finally, I'm finding that on occasion I did have to say, yes, I'm praying for you, and yes, I didn't get into as much detail as I did before. And so anyway, there I was, um, uh, standing up there, and we had the delegations from the different countries, and I got to meet the Pope and share about Estonia. And I remember that somebody said, well, tell me about I said, it's an amazing country and so forth. And they said, well, um, you speak English so well. And I thought, well, I don't know that I can go back down that road again. I said, well, we have a great education system. I just didn't, I mean, I was just totally caught up in the moment. Now, here's the good news. The goal, the reason I was sent there was to come back and help with the connection, the religious connection, but also accessibility laws. There was a big event about how to help. Began Special Olympics and helping those with special needs, and the Soviet Union didn't have that tradition, I guess, or that legal code. And so it became very specific around how to connect and help with that. So ultimately, it all turned out really well. But again, back to the Gump thing, what in the world? And God used that in a powerful way. And I was very, very fortunate to be a part of that.
I just think the fact that you were part of the birth of a nation, and not only that, but were their representative for this, official visit to the Vatican is just. I hadn't thought about it in Gump terms, but that totally could have been Act 3 of that movie. How many people from the town you grew up in have had an audience with the Pope as the representative of a foreign country? I wonder.
Well,
there can't be many.
Yeah, and still, as I tell that story, it just seems like a dream of some sort. But it was. I have a picture on the wall. I glance at it every now and then to say, okay, that really happened. God really did that. And so,
wow,
that's just fun, isn't it? As you go along for moments like that. There was another moment not too long after that for the the church there in Tallinn, I guess you'd call it First United Methodist Church, but it wasn't called. It was just called Tallinn Methodist Church. But uh, I was working with them, and since I was there on the ground, living there, and kind of helping pull together some different pieces as they wanted to rebuild their church and have a seminary and a soup kitchen and a publishing house and a dormitory and just kind of this big mission complex. And so I got to serve as a project director for that on the front end, and kind of put some pieces together. And it ended up being that I went to Korea with the two key leaders at the time of the congregation, Olaf Pernemitz and Thomas Payu. So amazing, saintly leaders. Oh my goodness! So they were mentors to me, and I was just kind of giving them a perspective on how we would do a building project in America. You know, I mean, what little I knew about it, it was just kind of, again, Gumpish. Let's pull you in. So we end up in Seoul, Korea, at the world's largest Methodist church with Bishop Sundo Kim, and they had to get back to Estonia early, and so Bishop Kim said, um, first of all, that week they gave the largest gift I believe they'd ever given at that time to a mission project, $1 million to our project.
Wow.
Wow.
And this was before they did the chapel at African University.
Uh-huh.
Uh, so we're on the receiving end of that amazing generosity. And anyway, so it's time for. Oh, and there was one little bit there where they said they looked at me, I think in particular, because my clothing was not really very impressive, pretty ragged. So I remember it wasn't. As a missionary, there are days when you don't have a lot to eat. So I was very very thin, and I remember they brought in uh, this group to make new suits for us and for all of us in this delegation. And the guy came to me and he was measuring me. He said, "How I make a suit for a man with no waist?" Was
Oh,
his comment. And so, but they were beautiful handmade, so generous. All these
yeah.
things they were doing for us during that time, and I was just this kind of struggling missionary trying to help out a little bit. But then they made this amazing gift, and so uh, brother Olaf and brother Thomas had to go back, and so he turned to me and said, "Would you share a word of thanks on behalf of the delegation?" I said, "I'd be happy to," but I really hadn't figured out what all that would mean. But they had about at least 5 or 6 services, of 8 to 10,000 people each time, and so I just remember going up the steps, looking out at this mass of people, and And well, I was like, what in the world? Lord, please give me a word. And so I'll never forget that Bishop Kim, or he was Dr. Kim at the time, he leaned over and said, just say hallelujah. And so I said, hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
And 10,000 people said, hallelujah. And it was just great. It just, wow,
Oh my gosh.
what in the world? God is good. So that connection there, what in the world am I doing there from Alabama in the middle of that? But God put me there. So uh, I'm just grateful again to look back on that, and it was special for sure.
I was wondering if you started going around saying, "I'm Patrick, Patrick Friday." Like Forrest Gump.
That's right. I should. Might as well. Oh goodness. But yeah, and I think as you go along, um, now fast forward a little bit further down the road. So um, at that point, I've come back to Candler actually in the mid '90s, and
Okay.
and and then the Bishop Fannin asked me to go back and represent our conference in Belarus with the Chernobyl zone,
Wow.
because all the fallout, not all, but a significant amount went north from Ukraine, right there on the border. Um, so we talk a lot about Chernobyl and Ukraine, but really it affected Belarus as much or even more in terms of fallout.
Mm.
And so this country, and of course we can talk about current politics too, it's pretty intense what's going on there and what they've had to suffer through. But just imagine before all of this, with the current war, they were dealing with Chernobyl, and it had
Yeah.
affected um, the whole population really. But then those dead zone areas and all that. So Bishop Fannin uh, sent me over there because they were basically saying we want each conference to take an area of the former Soviet Union and focus on it. And so I was happy to go, and we start working with the children of Chernobyl, and this led to bringing the kids to Alabama. Um, and I'll never forget, I'd come out of seminary, and now I was about to go back to former Soviet Union, and my wife, my future wife, I was telling her about it, and we got married, and so um, I said I can offer you a honeymoon in Chernobyl, and so uh, that's where we were. We went over there and we picked up the kids and brought them back, and so that's pretty dramatic when you've just gotten married and all of a sudden you're in charge of, I've forgotten how large that group was, but we had groups up to 75 kids. It was a lot of kids. Took over the
Oh my
plane,
gosh.
um, flying them. We had 250 kids over about a 4 or 5 year span of time. 8 to 12-year-old, beautiful, amazing kids who had thyroid
Wow.
issues and other things, and they were dealing with. And we brought them here, and they stayed with families, and the families were amazing who hosted them. Oh my goodness, so many people just pitching in and giving of their time, and the kids are telling them, America's amazing. We've never been able to eat bananas, or just have the basic things in life.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, remote villages, hadn't been around even running water. They had wells and things like that, and it was all contaminated. And so just to be in an environment where they could freely drink water and eat and go to the
Mm-hmm.
doctor and build up their immune system and things like that. So um,
Yeah.
again, that was one of those experiences, having those kids packed in that plane, taking over the plane, and flying them over here. And
Wow.
only God can do that, I mean, on the front end, I remember thinking, how are we going to pay for this? And what are we going to, what are we going to do with these kids and all this? And God just worked it out. So I was excited recently to share some of that story, because it was the roughly the 20th anniversary since
Mm-hmm.
since that ministry had occurred, and those kids are now adults with their own
Right.
kids,
Yep.
and several of them were involved in the independence movement that happened just before COVID hit, or maybe it was before the war, but
Yeah.
right in there, they were out marching and demonstrating in their country, because Belarus has, um, it's in the news, they say it's the last dictatorship of Europe, and has been
Mm-hmm.
since the 90s. So,
Mhm.
so it's exciting to see those young people, and I think we were a part of their journey. I know we were. They've
Wow.
told me that, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
So is that when you transitioned back into, did you come back to the general board or did you come back into a local church? Which happened first?
Actually, that transition, I came back and I was on conference staff, on the North
Uh-huh.
Alabama conference staff, as a uh, mission and advocacy director,
Mm.
and those were fascinating years. Of course, at that level, you're working a lot with VIM teams,
Mhm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and so I like that. I mean, that's on that side of the equation, you're thinking in terms of, okay, how can I help prepare teams for situations um, that are totally unimaginable? I mean, it's. I like to prepare both sides. That's a luxury when you're a missionary. You can kind of, and you've
Hmm.
done some of that, uh, going back and forth. You talk to the receiving group and sending group and so forth. But
Hmm.
but in this case, it was more about the training. So I got to do a lot of training and prep with the teams and people walking in my office. God's called me to be a missionary, and I'd love to talk with them. Remember one couple. Go ahead.
I was just no, no. I was going to ask, can you remember what maybe one or two of the principles that you taught were the most effective to
Hmm.
the teams that were going to be traveling?
Well, uh, I remember one of the teams. We were going along. Actually, I went with the team, and they were. I don't know what I was rambling on about, but they go, "Ah, it's just Patrick's flap." Because I quizzed them. I said, "What are you saying? You're murmuring back there. The murmurings from the team on the
Yeah.
back row, and up in the front with a microphone, or what? We're on a tour bus, whatever it was." And they were kind of back there, having fun. And they said, "Oh, it's just your flap." And I said, "What is my flap?" And they they said, "You always talk about flexibility,
Mm.
listening ability,
Mm.
adaptability, and patience." So clearly, for that to be prominent, I guess I did. I guess I did talk about those things all the
Yeah.
time, and I still agree with that. I think
Hmm.
you want to be flexible and not come in with a pre-made um, plan, because it's got to be the local plan that you're plugging into, and that's where the adaptability then plugs in as well. Um, and then you want to be patient, and this listening ability as well. In your patience, you really, and that's not as doers. We come in so excited, and ready to do. And this makes me think of something I discovered about the Appalachian Service Project (ASP).
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I was in, um, I believe it was Minnesota. Later on, I'm doing training. So now things have shifted for me to a lot of training and equipping, I would call it, um, equipping workshops. And I remember I was there and we were talking about what do you do the first day you're in a mission setting. And somebody said, well, um, they need to have something for me to do at 8 o'clock because um, I'm giving up my vacation, and these are billable hours. That was the phrase. These are
Oh
billable hours that
gosh.
I'm giving up to
Oh.
go serve.
Which is exactly how Jesus approached everything in his life, right?
Well, it wasn't said though with any um, ill will or something. It was just matter of fact, right? I've This is
Right.
my vacation. I'm busy. I've taken time out of my life. These are quote billable hours and so forth. So, and his point was, so when I'm on the ground, they need to, you know, have me doing something, right? And he said it drives me crazy when I go to Appalachia and they have Mosey Monday. And I said, Mosey Monday? What is Mosey Monday? And he goes, well, they won't let you do anything. They take away your toolkit, they take away your medical bag, they take away all those things that you brought, right? To use your hammer. If I had a hammer, right? They take your hammer away and they make you sit on the front porch and talk to these people and get to know their names.
It just sounds horrible. Horrible.
So so it was but it was so honest. I
Yeah.
mean, it
Yeah. Yeah.
wasn't, you know what I'm saying? There was
Yeah.
something about that where indeed, yes, I'm thinking, wow, that is brilliant. Of course. And they take away your camera. They won't let you take pictures. I mean, they take it all away. They just want you to sit there, look at this person, and see God in this person, see Christ right there. And so, what I find to be interesting with most groups is once you have walked through scenarios a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and they've told you, look, we didn't have enough time to build or finish our project or whatever. And then you kind of get beyond that and you say, well, why did you go? What do you remember? Oh, I remember the people. I remember the laughter. I remember, well,
Right.
you got to make time for that. You got to be flexible and open
Yeah.
about that. And I always look forward to those moments where God, and this is for all of us, we get caught up in our agenda,
Mm-hmm.
and God puts a child or whoever it is,
Yeah.
the person there you've come to serve. Suddenly you realize I'm here for them. It's not
Mm-hmm.
about me, it's about them. So
Yeah.
that's been a
On,
wonderful thing.
on an episode that came out a few weeks ago, one of the things I talked about is the difference in our actions defining our relationships and our
Mm,
relationships defining our actions. And if we can get that part right, where it starts with the relationship, and then the things that happen after that, they're going to look and feel and be different than they would have been if we had started with, they may be the very same things, but
mm-hmm,
they're different because it's the relationship. It's because we sat on the porch with that person for a whole
mm-hmm,
day
mm-hmm.
before we
That's right.
started swinging hammers, that
Mm-hmm,
now whatever it is that we do with the hammers is going to mean something different than if we had started with the hammers.
mm-hmm,
And one of the things that I hope we can accomplish with this podcast is getting people to start to think that way before they go. That this can
mm-hmm,
be an accompaniment to the kinds of training that their churches do, or that UMVM does, or whoever. But that we can be a part of that conversation so that people aren't frustrated by Mosey Mondays. That's the expectation. It may be the highlight. Like they, not because of laziness, but just because they get it, that
mm-hmm,
day where they just sat on the front porch and talked, that was what it was all about.
mm-hmm,
Um, all of us bring different gifts to the table. And I'm thinking about how unique your journey into local church ministry, or let me say that again. I'm thinking about how unique your journey into um, being a pastor of a local church was. That's not typical, right? I mean, of all the
mm-hmm,
people that I graduated with from seminary, I don't know of any of them that followed the same sort of path that you did. And I don't mean like nation building and visits with the Pope, but you know what I mean. And so it makes me think about just the unique experience and skills and perspective that you bring into the local church. And what I'm curious about, first of all, is just how aware are you of that? When you're writing sermons, when you're
mm-hmm.
teaching Sunday school, when you're doing counseling, how much does those years that you spent in Europe, um, the experience that you had in Korea, how much does that come into your thought process that you're aware of? It also makes me wonder if Ashley and I just showed up at your church one day and started asking people, tell us about your pastor.
Mm.
How
Mm,
many of them in their description of you would include, well, I mean, he spent, years in the mission field in these amazing places and da 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 da, and now he's here with us, da da da. Like, how evident
mm-hmm,
are those gifts that because of this conversation, those things that we clearly you're going to be bringing to the table because they're part of you. But I wonder, how aware are you of that, and how aware do you feel like your local church is of that? And yeah,
mm-hmm,
Ashley.
Well, I was literally going to ask the same question because you know that I've been trying to cultivate my curiosity.
Yep.
And my question and how I was going to frame it was, other than having the best sermon illustrations ever. How does all of this experience translate from the mission field to a mission advocate to now being the senior pastor of a local church? How does this all translate? So good job, Will.
Good
Hmm.
job, Ashley.
Well, it's a great question because I believe that we're part of a priesthood of believers, and everybody's a missionary. And I love that sign, when you're leaving a church out of the parking lot, it says, you're now entering the mission field. So, wow, all that just resonates with me and you all, I know. Um, and I think it just permeates how you engage people. I really
Mm,
do. I think um, my my church, my congregation here is just so amazing. They're very patient with me when I start telling these stories. Probably tell them too much, but uh, I think in some cases it means that when you look at the Bible, when you're reading a passage, um, I know when I'm talking about the Middle East and Jerusalem and so forth, I think about being there, and I think about the smells and the and the even the fear I had one time when I was there, and I um, longer story, but the point is I ended up on the other side from kind of the Jewish side to the Palestinian side, and I was taking some pictures and
mm,
uh, and things were falling out of the window onto me. And I thought, that's odd. Why are these things hitting me? And then I realized they were throwing things at me. And so I went, I ran back to the other side, and there were two Jewish soldiers, uh, and they said, "You're glad you're back, aren't you?" And so I just think, when we see um, situations in the Bible where there's tension, there's strife, people are combative, and uh, and you have the Christian community, uh, followers of Christ being persecuted and suffering. Those all those things come to life for me, and I'm grateful for those experiences. Talking to the great martyrs of the faith back to Estonia. Seeing pictures on the wall of their
yeah.
superintendents, uh, black and white pictures.
Mm,
And um, Alexander Kuhn was one of them, I remember. And it's this faded black and white picture. There were several others, but they were persecuted, and ultimately, some of them were killed as enemies of the state because
mm,
they preached eternal life. And the communist government said, they're frauds, they're charlatans, and that was their justification for taking these amazing saintly men of faith and women of faith, putting them in prison, sending them to the Siberia, to the Gulag, and those type things. And that's so it's hard for us to fathom that in our experience here in the U.S. Suffering. I remember another time, and indeed, when I talked to them about it, they'd say, well, those same pastors, the ones who survived and who were in the gulags for 5, 10, 20 years, and finally were released and allowed to come back to Estonia. And I remember this 11 time zone. So they're put way over there, going towards Alaska, right? And then they're allowed to come all the way back to Europe. And anyway, the point is they would say, what are you, do you hate Russians? And they would
mm-hmm,
say, no, we don't, we don't hate Russians. Um, at the foot of the cross, all the hatred dies.
mm-hmm,
Things like that. Uh, and they said, you were you were in prison, you were being persecuted, you almost died. I said, no, seminary was, the Gulag was the best seminary in the world. And they would talk about um, writing scripture and prayers with their fingernail in the wooden bunks that they
Oh
had to
my
stay in
gosh.
so they could, and so you're just, your concept of suffering and in Corinthians, there's so many passages around suffering and and we carry that around with us. And now I'm fast forwarding to a conversation with the Metropolitan of Belarus for the Orthodox Church, and our conference had given some coats. We had about, I don't know, 20,000 coats that we brought over in containers. Unfortunately, our coats are not what they typically use. It's kind of like a windbreaker, that we're bringing
I knew
over.
that after a
Yeah,
February in Russia.
you
Yes.
you got it. So it's very gracious. I'm basically bringing over what we thought were coats, but they're kind of windbreakers for July for them, But anyway, so he said, we're just so grateful for your help, and we need your help. And people couldn't find food at that time. It was a very difficult situation. But he said this. He said it's okay because Christians must suffer if we want to really connect with Christ.
Wow.
That's because Christ suffered for us. And so it's not a message, back to your original question, that we'd preach about here normally, right? It's great to suffer. That's just not something you hear from the pulpit in the
Mhm.
US a lot.
Mhm.
But around the world, you're going to see persecuted, suffering Christians, um, and they are the most mobilized, passionate, dynamic Christians on earth. And so for us, that's hard to understand, and yet um, when you've experienced that, it really helps you to relate better to what the Bible's saying, and share that with your congregation.
Um, Thank you. Ugo has just called me, our builder has just called me 3 times in a row, which makes me think something's going on with the group that's here
Oh yeah.
working. So I'm going to step out for a second. But what I want to hear about, maybe we can sort of kind of tie things up with this, is having had the experience you've had as a missionary and now being the leader of a local church. What are your hopes? And this is kind of an awkward, maybe it's better for me to step out and let Ashley ask this question. Sort of what are your hopes for how your church understands partnership with missionaries, what that's supposed to look and feel and be like? You know what I mean? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to step out. I need to call and just make sure everything's okay. If there's something else you want to talk about, go for it. Otherwise, you can go ahead and start talking and I'll just jump back in when I can. Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Ashley, would
Sounds
you
good.
add to that any direction?
No, that's a great question. I because having been both a missionary, having been a senior pastor, you have that
Mm-hmm.
unique ability to see both sides. So, how is it that you have reframed the mission conversation for your church and how to be in partnership and how to live life, how to be companions with those in your Judea, in your Birmingham, and
Mm-hmm.
to the ends of the earth throughout the world? So, how is it that you've reframed local and global mission in your church?
Well, I'm a big believer that the local and the global go together. It's kind of a global,
Mm-hmm.
right, approach. And so,
Agreed.
um, if we um, if we're able to get people to Costa Rica, for example,
Mm-hmm.
um, then when they come back, we want them to apply that locally, right?
Right.
And a lot of times in the life of a church, you'll see people who do the international thing and they don't do local mission. They just do international mission, um, or they do local and they don't think about the global, etc. So, I I really want people to see that that's one and the same. When you have that skill set and you're working on it, um, and it gets back to sustainability, and capacity building, and relational engagement, and seeing
Mm-hmm.
the merit in that. So if your church and our church is working with ministry down in downtown Birmingham, and kind of the classic soup kitchen thing, but this ministry, the Church of the Reconciler, has shifted away from that, and now they're doing something very relational. And it's hard to get some churches to buy in because they're conditioned to going and
Mm-hmm.
basically standing back, right? There's some separation, giving out food, and not a lot of engagement. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess there's some comfort in that too. But once you get beyond that and go out and engage people, and of course street people, um, that's a tough life, and they may not have been able to get a new set of clothes or shower or bathe or whatever. I mean, they're surviving on the street, and so you want to meet them where they are
Mhm.
versus them meeting you where you are. And so
Mhm.
that's what I try to share with my congregation is that it's that kind of engagement. But let's practice locally. Let's get good at it locally before we go global,
Mhm.
because you don't want to go global and then kind of cut your teeth on things. You really want to learn how to do that here where you can pour more time into it. It's all about investing in someone and
Mhm.
pouring time into their life. And it's messy. My predecessor, Clint Rabb, named one of my kids after Clint. He was, well, we lost him um, there in Haiti when the
Oh, the earthquake.
earthquake occurred. Yeah. Clint
Mm.
Rabb and Sam Dixon, my mentors, named my
Mm.
other son after Sam, Sam and Clint,
Wow.
uh, amazing church leaders and saintly people. But Clint would say that when he got to Global Ministries, Bob Harmon, who was there at the time back in the 90s, said, well, mission is messy. Can you help bring some structure to that? Because it's just so messy. That's another thing I would say to my church is that, and I do, it's unpredictable. It's messy. You've got to um, be open to the fact that it's not going to be what you think it is, and and um, it's just the opposite. It needs to be what the local people need, what they're envisioning, what God's put on their heart, and we're there to accompany them. So accompaniment is hard to do
Mhm.
when you come in with resources and expectations. Maybe there's been a pattern for generations. I saw
Hmm.
that in Africa. The pattern was set generations ago of
Mhm.
what your American partner does or doesn't do. And
Right.
so it was highly unusual. I would always ask them, okay, so how often, back to Mosey Monday, does an American group show up and just spend the day listening to you? And of course, they would
Mhm.
laugh because that doesn't happen. They would show up and the Americans would say, here, this is what we're going to do. And we got money for this. And they'd say yes. Um, and it's just the opposite. You just got to think uh, differently. So I try to tell stories like that and help people think in those terms. Um, Towards the latter years there at Globe Ministries, for me, it was all about talking about a kind of a rule of thumb.
Mhm.
Uh, I called it 50-50, and just think in terms of how can you have a 50-50 relationship with your partner. And
Mhm.
actually, I was fudging a little bit. It should be 51-49, which is the local people are 51. And if you think about that, they get the final vote, they get the final say. But if you can start 51-49, then you can build in that capacity building where
Mhm.
eventually it's 70-30, 80-20, and they take the project and run with it and you step back from it. And they're not dependent. It's all about um, dependency. You don't want to create dependency. You want to um, work yourself out of a job and all that. So if you can think in terms of, I don't want to start with local people being dependent on us for anything, you
Hmm.
know. Um, those are a few thoughts
Wow.
on my mind.
Well, I can't tell you what a relief it is to me to know that the things that I will talk about to the members of your church that you will be sending to us later this year will be reinforced for them. They've already heard them from you in the pulpit, and they will continue to be reinforced in the pulpit. It's really difficult. I mean, you talk about how difficult it is for a pastor to have people, in the sanctuary for 1 hour out of the week and to sort of make an impact. Well, that's sort
Hmm.
of a struggle for me. I get them here for 1 week out of the
Right.
year. And if
Right.
that's the only week that they're thinking about this stuff and talking about this stuff, that's just a big ask. So for me to know that the church they're coming from, this is a big part of what is talked about regularly at church. And it's going to continue to be a big part when they get home from this. What is healthy? What is companionship? All that kind of stuff. Man, it changes the whole dynamic while they're here. And so I'm thankful. I'm so glad for them that you are there. And I'm glad for us, selfishly, that you are there. And we're thankful to be partners with both of your churches, Ashley and Patrick, and for the way that you all understand and prepare people to go out into the world, to go out into the mission field, whether it's in Shreveport or Birmingham or Costa Rica or elsewhere. Um, yeah, this has been fascinating. I'm so
Yeah.
happy to have heard your story again and to know that most of how I remembered it was pretty accurate, because I started to worry that I might have sort of misrepresented you in some ways, but I think I got it pretty much. I got it pretty right. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm just so grateful for both of you and what you do. I know the challenge of being the mission pastor, at a church and
Hmm.
leading that, a larger church. Um, and then, of course, you're connecting back with Will and someone on the
Yeah.
ground, a missionary on the ground, the day to day of being a missionary on the ground, and then trying to receive groups. And you receive a lot of groups. So, my prayer continues to be for you and the Baileys, your whole family, as you navigate that. That's a lot to handle. I mean, um, when we come to see you, I know that, we just need a lot of tender care, and you do that. And you're an excellent preacher. My people are like, they want you to come back and preach to us again. You did a great
I
job
would I
last
would be
time.
happy
So
to. Thank you. Tender care,
yes,
I
thank
think, are probably the first two things that come to people's mind when they think about Will Bailey. Tender
Yep,
care.
that's exactly what I was thinking.
That's what Yolanda. I do the preaching. Yolanda does the tender care.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. I'm just honored to be on this podcast with you today.
Yeah, Patrick, you've given me so much to think about. I've been making mental notes about just different. You talked about communion at the very beginning, and I've been thinking
Mm.
ever since then about how we could put Will and his congregation, or our Russian congregation, up on the screen and do communion together during a worship service. I know the time difference
Absolutely.
might be a little tricky, but my goodness, that would just be so much fun, so much fun.
Please,
But
please let me know, because
I,
I'll be praying for you, and I'd love to see it if you put it out there. I mean, it's we had services of every continent connected doing communion, and I remember in a conference, maybe it was in Ohio, but anyway, I was there, and it was with, let's see, Cambodia, I believe, and maybe Vietnam. I guess primarily Vietnam. And so we're going around Vietnam to all the little churches in Vietnam. That's a tough place to start the church. And but they were so excited to connect to the larger church, because you can
mm,
just imagine you're so isolated and you want to connect. And so for our partners, for them to connect to the larger church, and it's a great equalizer, right? You're all at the same level, and the body of
That's
Christ
the
is.
table.
That's
That's
it.
the
That's the
table.
table. There you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, gosh, I hadn't thought about that, but because we can sort of talk about the table and the fact that we've all been invited to it almost sort of flippantly, like, but
Hmm.
to be able to say to someone who first of all never knew there was a table,
Right.
and now they found out there's a
mhm.
table, and that they've been invited to it, and that they've been invited to it as on equal terms as every single other person who's going to be at that table. I mean, how could they
Hmm.
not be excited about that?
Hmm.
That's amazing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
Amen.
again, thank you, Patrick. It's
Thank
been
you.
so nice to meet you. I'm so glad that we have so many things in common, and I can't
Yeah,
wait to come to Birmingham and meet you in person and visit with you.
I'm
Yeah.
counting on it. All right.
All
Bless
right.
you both.
All right. You
Thanks,
too.
Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Broken Banquet, a podcast by Will Bailey and Ashley Goad. Music provided by Irene and the Sleepers. Join us next week for another episode. He's prepared the table. All things are ready. Come to the feast.